This is my camp on my 21st birthday at 1 o'clock in the morning. And after a good night's sleep, I had a perfect birthday present, winds going in just the right direction. I could lie back in my raft and let the winds do the work for a change. And with my fishing rod out, caught this Arctic char. Now, Arctic char breed in these lakes, and they grow to about this size, about 16 inches, before growing down to the Arctic Ocean and growing much larger, as you'll see shortly. And that's the Chamberlain Glacier, and the second highest peak in the Brooks Mountain Range. And it's got the Chamberlain Glacier crescent in the peak of the Mountain Chamberlain there. And like all of the glaciers in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, it is receding very quickly because of climate change. And as is happening globally, almost all glaciers now are melting and receding globally, with only a few exceptions. In Glacier National Park, there's about 150 glaciers in 1850. We were down to about 100 glaciers in 1900. It was at 33 glaciers 7 years ago. We're now at 26 glaciers, and it's expected to be the glacierless park as early as 2030. This was a major tourist attraction. People came from all over the world to Montana to walk hundreds of yards into what was that boulder ice cave and boulder glacier. And this is the exact same spot in 1988. The glacier has melted and the rate of warming has accelerated rapidly since 1988. And all throughout the world, glaciers are in very fast retreat. The Columbia Glacier in southern Alaska is retreating half a mile a year, and as this ice on land melts, it raises sea levels. Now, scientists a few years ago thought sea levels would rise at a slow pace because most of the world's ice are in the ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica. And just a few years ago, scientists thought these would just melt slowly like an ice cube, but that's not the way it's happening. James Hansen, a senior scientist with NASA, reports that what's happening is big lakes are forming on top of these ice sheets. These ice sheets are 2 to 3 miles thick. And then the water is flowing down to the very bottom of these ice sheets through moulins, which are rivers vertically down through these ice sheets. The water is flowing underneath the ice sheets and lubricating the flow of the entire ice sheets into the oceans at an accelerating rate, such that the melting in Greenland has doubled in just the last 5 years, according to James Hansen. And he's saying that the melting of these ice sheets is explosively rapid. And James Hansen said if we just look at how the Earth was when temperatures were 3 degrees Celsius warmer, sea levels were 80 feet higher. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change found that we could see a 6.4 degrees Celsius temperature rise this century. And many reports find that that report failed to take into account many effects that could raise the temperatures well above 8 degrees Celsius this century. Now, it takes more time for the ice to melt than the temperature rise, but what these scientists are saying is it's not nearly as much time as we thought, and that is the legacy we are leaving to future generations. And so we need to take much stronger action. I think the Safe Climate Act, while not nearly strong enough, is a very important first step, and we all can get involved in lobbying our senators and representatives because they are hearing a tremendous amount from the coal and oil and auto industries, and they need to hear a lot more from citizens because currently it's unsure if that will pass. It's going to be having hearings next month. Now, back to my journey. I had rafted across Lake Schrader and encountered the first people I had met in 26 days. This is Paul and Mary from Wenatchee, Washington. And we're actually still on Lake Schrader here. It's just off to the right of that photo. And that's the Kikiktat River that flows from the lake down towards the Arctic Ocean. And we got rained in the spot for 3 days. And my goal was to raft down the Kikiktat River for 9 miles because I didn't want to carry that heavy pack any more than I had to. But Paul, who is a canoe instructor, strongly warned against my trying to raft a flooded Arctic river without a wetsuit or a life preserver. Now, Paul had worked on the Trans-Alaska Pipeline in the 1970s, He said, like many Americans, he was duped into thinking that the oil industry would be a benign presence on the tundra. He said they have sprawled like a cancer, and he was very opposed to drilling in the Arctic Refuge. But I decided that I would go ahead and try to raft the flooded Arctic River without a wetsuit or a life preserver, because I was 21, thought I could make it. Pushed out into the river and hit some 7-foot waves that flipped my raft over. I was flushed miles down a very cold river and almost died. I managed to get out, and I managed to get most of my gear out. I actually had to jump back in the very cold river to drag my gear out, but I lost my paddle and fishing rod, very critical items, and then had a very difficult time surviving the night with freezing rain coming down and being on the brink of death with hypothermia all night. Obviously, I did manage to survive and spent the next day walking up and down the creek trying to find my lost paddle and fishing rod with no luck. I was able to catch up with Paul and Mary, and they loaned me their fishing rod and gave me some matches, and I was able to continue on with my journey. And about a week later, I encountered muskox. These are permanent residents of the coastal plain. They have hair that's 8 times warmer than sheep's wool. It extends all the way down to the ground. These are males that sometimes go off alone or in small groups. The breeding males and females and calves stay in herds of about 30 to 60, and when threatened, they form a very tight circle, the horns facing outward, and the calves in the inside of the circle. And this formed great defense against wolves and bears, and the native peoples respected them and did not overhunt them. But when the whalers and traders came in the 1800s, they shot the muskox, and the tendency of the muskox to stay by their fallen ones made it easy for them to be totally shot out of the refuge around 1900. They were reintroduced in the 1970s and have repopulated, and with their reintroduction, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge is one of the very few places on Earth with all of its original inhabitants still intact, making it one of the most important areas in the world to protect. But as you can see from this map, the proposed development is right on top of the muskox range. And scientists say it would be devastating to this, one of the last populations of muskox in the world. And unlike before, when they were shot out and the habitat was still intact, the oil companies would leave a permanent destruction of the habitat that we cannot fix like we did before. And about a week later, I arrived at the Jago River, again totally without food, and I was trying to figure out how I was going to get to an island in the Arctic Ocean, the only nearest civilization, home of the Inupiat peoples in the village of Kaktovik, and my plan was just to raft out into the Arctic Ocean to the island. And I was going to raft down this river to get to the ocean. But I lost my paddle, and my raft was full of holes, so I was trying to figure out how to make a paddle when a University of Alaska at Fairbanks helicopter came by, and I flagged it down, and I got a lift to the island. And this is looking out north from Barter Island towards the North Pole, and the polar bear were floating by quite close. And this area is the most important area in the world to protect, to give a chance for the polar bear to survive in the wild. As you can see from this top map, the Arctic Refuge coastal plain is the densest denning ground of polar bear on Earth. But the proposed development is right on top of this denning ground and would be disastrous to the polar bear if it were to occur. And it's very critical that we pass legislation giving permanent protection to the coastal plain. If you call your senators or representatives, ask for a passage of the Arctic Wilderness Bill, and they'll know what you're talking about. It's House Resolution 39, and they haven't announced a number in the Senate yet. But if you just tell them to support the Arctic Wilderness Bill, or in protection of the coastal plain of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge as wilderness, they'll know exactly what you're talking about.